Well, hi, I'm Andrew McKean. Welcome to the second episode of On Gravel, a periodic conversation with two of my favorite fellas in the world. We've got Ryan Bronson and Eric Dinger. Good afternoon, gents.
Good afternoon.
Hello. Hi, Mr. McKean.
Well, we talked in our first episode about the cruelty of August, and we also brought up mosquitoes. Not to jump right into the news, but it was announced this week that the Lone Star tick has made its way into my home state of Montana. And, you know, quite aside from the apocalyptic sunsets because of all the smoke from fires of our burning forests and just the insane heat, this one had the ability to really bum me out. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but this is the tick that can cause really a lifetime allergy to red meat. And to me, it's just the lowest blow for a sportsman. You guys dealt with this in your lives?
I have become aware of the Lone Star tick in recent years, and it makes me almost not want to go to Oklahoma and Texas to hunt. But if they're showing up in Montana, now they're getting in. Now it's getting personal. But this sounds like a creature that was genetically engineered by PETA or the Humane Society of the United States. I mean, it makes you allergic to eating red meat, which is the whole reason that I usually get exposed to ticks is my search for red meat. So it really is
right?
The cruelest possible disease.
So what are we supposed to eat at the end of a hunting trip if not red meat? Honestly,
I don't know. It is like biological warfare in some ways. And I've got a couple of friends who have this allergy, and it's definitely changed their outdoor experiences, and the whole reason that they pursue game is to eat it. So I don't know. I'm not saying I'm going to get it. I'm not saying it's going to be a thing here, but it reconfirms that really the best things in Texas really should just stay in Texas.
It reminds me of a saying my dad always has, that when you're doing something you know you shouldn't be doing, like eating a porterhouse, that, well, you got to die from something. And I'll tell you, we all have a friend, Scott, from Nashville, that has this, and he looks 10 years younger. I mean, he doesn't eat any red meat anymore. He really watches his diet. And when I see him, I'm always reminded that I am, in fact, probably not doing myself any favors with the way I eat red meat. And then I remember my dad saying that, I've got to die anyway, so I just as well die with red meat in my belly.
I remember reading an economist story. This is completely unrelated to hunting, but it was an economist story where there was a European country that had come to the realization that morbidly obese people within their country had lower healthcare costs because they died younger from more things that didn't linger as long. Makes me wonder if getting us off of red meat is actually going to cost us more money for healthcare in the long term. I know mental health wise, I would need mental health help if I couldn't eat red meat.
In my family, we call it the gripper. It's the felling heart attack at a young age. So maybe this will extend my life. But to Dinger's point, what's the purpose in a long life if it can't involve copious amounts of red meat?
I mean, it begs the question, would you trade 5% more quality of life for 5% longer life, knowing that the end of your life is when you get to add the years and the end of your life is not nearly as fun as this point in your life?
Well, I think anyone who's seen me at night at SHOT Show knows that I'm subscribing to the shorter life but live it while I'm here.
Well, I don't want to get too esoteric at this point, but there is an interesting study that, there's that political survey question that gets tossed around about every 4 years, and it's, do you feel like the world or your country is in better shape now than it was 4 years ago? Well, it turns out there's a human, distinctly human characteristic, no matter what country you live in or what culture you live in, that the past is always better than the present. Even though from all sorts of measurable empirical stats, things like homicide rates and birth rates and longevity of life and all that stuff tend to be better as time goes on. People kind of look back with fondness. And so I don't know. I don't know if I want to add more years to that part of my life. Can I make a deal and add them to the most favorable part of my life?
Yeah, like stretch out this phase.
Could we have two Novembers every year? Just give me 2 Novembers every year, and however many years I lose at the end because I've gotten that extra month, I'll take it.
So Bronson, you're talking to us from the cab of a pickup. Tell me you're on your way to gravel.
No, I'm sitting on gravel. We're recording this on a Friday afternoon, and I took the day off from work, and the family and I are up at the family farm, which is about 3 hours from where I live in the Twin Cities. So I'm up in west central Minnesota. The reason that I am in the pickup truck is because I needed to be somewhere where I could get a good, strong signal because we don't have internet at the farm. So I need cell signal. So I'm out here, and it's 91 degrees. So it's one of those crappy August humid days that, so I'm sitting in an air-conditioned cab of a pickup truck where it's quiet because my son and my dad are currently having water fights, and it's impossible to do that quietly. So I had to get away from them. So I'm sitting here in my pickup truck. My dog is in here with me just because when I get in the pickup, she insists on coming with because it's got to be something more fun than what she's doing now. So she's here with me, bored out of her mind, looking at me like I'm, let's go do something fun. But the good news is I'm looking around, and I am starting to see the 13-line striped ground squirrels, what we call streaky gophers around here, are starting to come out. So that means when we finish up this podcast, I think my son and I will be going and trying to get him some streaky gophers. Now, the bad news is my dad, who's the game manager here for the farm, said that streaky gophers, it's youth only season now, that we've shot enough this year that he doesn't want us to over decimate the streaky gopher population. So now it's only the youth hunt. So my son will be the only one on the trigger, but it's still a lot of fun. This streaky gophers might be the closest thing to Western big game hunting that I get here in Minnesota. So we set up and we glass for them and we put stocks on them because, we're hunting them in the farmyard. So there's certain directions you can't shoot. You can't hit the barn, you can't hit the house. You got to change directions. And it feels like a sage, flat, mule deer, spot and stock. So, which is a lot of fun, especially when you're an 8-year-old boy, which my son is.
Contribute this to your 8-year-old son's life. When I was about the same age, we just called them gophers, or stripy gophers. And my dad once told me that they took baling twine and they'd make a little noose and put it around the gopher's hole and then smooch at them, do the kind of that deal, and they'll stick their head up, and then you rip the baling twine tight and you snag them. I always thought he was kidding, and then we went out and tried it, and we caught a few. And it's like, I would say for a little boy, it's equal parts like thrill of shooting something added with the thrill of catching a big fish. Because once you catch them, they don't just sit there. You don't just sit there. You got to play them back to the boat, basically. So I promise you will giggle for a half hour after you do it. We never actually killed them. We just caught them and let them go because we always wanted to try and catch them again. But as soon as you catch them once, at least in my experience, you can't ever catch them again. So absolutely a giggle fest. You'll love it if you try it.
What kind of gophers and ground squirrels do you have in Montana?
Well, we have Columbia ground squirrels. Everybody calls gophers here. I think if we call them streaky gophers, it would be hard to take them as seriously as we take these.
Well,
streaky gophers. We take them more seriously than streaky gophers. It sounds a little bit like they're speedy, but I definitely get the old 13-line part of it. But I couldn't say streaky gophers with a straight face.
Well, try noosing a streaky gopher.
So the problem I have with the noosing, I'm trying to picture the release. Do you Do you wear gloves and get your little fingers in there and get them unnoosed?
No, once you get them close enough, then they really start to freak out, and if you get some slack in the line, they get themselves out. So you can get them all the way to your feet, though.
So it's no different than fishing with barbless hooks. You got to keep tension.
Yeah. Yep. As soon as tension's gone, they can wiggle out.
How long?
I think Norman McKean wanted, when he wrote A River Runs Through It, what he really wanted to write about was snagging gophers, but he just wasn't very good at it. So he wrote about fly fishing instead.
This sounds completely made up, but I'm telling you, go get a 20-foot stretch of bait, just long enough to where you know that the gopher is going to be willing to stick his head up. That's what you need. And you need, a 3-inch, just big enough to get around their hole so they can stick their head through it, and you're good to go.
Is it a little like snagging a fish? Sometimes you might be a little late on the tension, so you're going to get them around the thorax.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I implore you two to try this. You both have gophers in your life. Try it and report back next week.
Well, I'm going to try it today, but it makes me think that if a listener out there doesn't have gophers in their life, that they're living an unfull life.
Is there a little moral problem being from the Gopher State, being a Gopher fan? Do you feel any remorse whatsoever when you kill the namesake of your mascot?
No, none whatsoever. I've always thought that's ironic, but it starts out with the basic premise that is poor, in that we're the Gopher State, and right next door we've got Wisconsin, and they call themselves the Badger State. And what do badgers eat? They eat gophers. And then you go over to Michigan. Mm-hmm. So this is a whole Big Ten thing. Big Ten is a football conference. It's I don't know if you're familiar with it there in Lincoln, Eric, but then you got the Wolverines that eat everything. So you basically set yourself up for failure when you start out by placing yourself at the bottom of the food chain for your school mascot. I mean, if you're going to have if we have them in Minnesota, I would advocate that tarantula hawks be the mascot here in Minnesota.
Or how about Texas Lone Star ticks? I mean, you're good for nothing anyway, so you just as well have a cool mascot.
I would like to know if there's a tarantula hawk equivalent to the Lone Star tick, something that eats Lone Star ticks and only Lone Star ticks, but I don't know if it exists.
If there is, we should start a breeding program and start releasing them. Man, that's not the last huge business idea you're going to hear on this podcast, but trap and transport of Lone Star tick eating insects or crustaceans or whatever they may be is a big idea.
So possums keep moving farther north here in the Midwest. When I was a kid, possums didn't really exist north of Iowa. Now they're all over Minnesota. And we've got possum apologists that say that, but they eat all these ticks. And I'm skeptical. I need to see a biological paper that proves that, and I've never found it. Well, I haven't looked for it, but at least at this point, I choose to not believe that possums are a net benefit in the tick world. All I know is they eat a lot of bird eggs.
I think a sub-theme of this podcast is great band names, and I think the Possum Apologist is right up there.
Okay. So there is a band out of Austin, Texas called the Possum Posse, and they recorded what may be the greatest. It's the reason YouTube was invented. They recorded a song called Guy on a Buffalo. They took this old B movie that kind of looks like a Grizzly Adams episode, but it was an actual full movie. You've got to Google this. You got to go on YouTube and watch Guy on a Buffalo. It's a bluegrass music where they basically do the play-by-play of what's happening in the movie, and it is the funniest thing I've ever seen. Honest, this is why YouTube was invented. It wasn't invented just to ban gun videos. It was invented so that people could see Guy on a Buffalo videos, which periodically in the office at Federal Premium Ammunition, Have I mentioned that I work there? We probably watch that video in the office once a month, and everyone gathers around and has to watch it because it's that awesome. It's a great band. I saw them once when I was in Austin. So, Possum Posse, you've got competition coming from the Possum Apologists.
Well, I can also tell you that there will be some YouTubing of Gopher roping as well.
Gopher Ropers is a nice band name.
You wouldn't say streaky Gopher ropers, though. Just Gopher ropers.
Well, we call them streaky gophers because, around here we've got real gophers, which are pocket gophers, and then we've got the ground squirrels that are 13-line striped ground squirrels. If I remember their genus and species, I think it's Spermophilus trideclamitis, but I may be off a little bit there.
Hey Dinger, you're a South Dakotan. Aren't those called picket pins in South Dakota, or is that a prairie dog?
That must be a prairie dog. I've never heard that. We had gophers and 13-line ground squirrels as well, and I never heard that.
Maybe it's a western South Dakota thing.
Could be.
Well, then you got Richardson's ground squirrels. You got Franklin's ground squirrels. I'm starting to sound like Bubba from Forrest Gump with my ground squirrels here, but there's and they're all pretty cool little creatures. I mean, they're the closest thing to true hibernators that you're going to find, and I think they're unprotected everywhere. So many a young lad has honed their rifle shooting skills on them.
I did.
I don't think they pay bounties on them anymore. I can still get bounties on pocket gophers up here in west central Minnesota, but I don't even own a gopher trap anymore, I don't think.
Yeah, you do.
I live on the Milk River here. I live on the Milk River in Montana, and we used to have a lot of gophers before the latest flooding, and before that, there was a big old gopher shoot on a weekend in the summertime, and big prizes were at stake. You had to bring in tails of the gophers that you killed, and like everything else that's good about America, it was ruined by people who were hoarding tails. And they would bring in just Albertson grocery bags full of gopher tails, and finally somebody inspected them and they were all freezer burned.
Oh.
Yep. The cheaters won, but only once.
I swear to God, I thought that was a dad joke coming. Did you think that was a dad joke, Bronson?
No, I kind of knew where he was going because I've never known of a gopher bounty operation that didn't have some level of fraud involved with it. It's it's a Minnesotan's version of a still, from West Virginia. I mean, we don't have moonshiners. We have organized gopher crime. Another band name.
Well, last episode we talked about the pox that is mosquitoes, and Dinger asked the question if any Minnesotan story was also a mosquito story. I kind of get the food value and the food web purpose of mosquitoes, but I don't get the biological value of ticks. I'm not going to return to that, but you brought up the tarantula hawk, and I think we owe it to our audience to talk about this critter. What in the world are you talking about?
Well, I think it's important for folks to understand that there's a group of folks in the outdoor industry that are affiliated around a couple of key themes, but one of them is spiders. There's a group of us that are committed to spider habitat and spider management, and we call ourselves the Arachnid Sportsman Society, and we're trying to bring attention and an awareness to the big spider issues. But in that process, we have members all over the country who send in pictures of the spiders that they encounter in their parts of the world. And we've got a guy named Skip who lives in southern Colorado in tarantula country that usually has really cool tarantula photos. But he sent a photo, posted it on our Facebook page, that showed this giant, he called it a beetle at first, but he amended it and said it was a wasp, that was dragging a tarantula fairly quickly across the trail that he encountered when he was running. And so we all started doing the research, and we discovered that the thing that had done this is an insect that's called a tarantula hawk. and it's a big wasp, lives in places where tarantulas live, and it has possibly the coolest life cycle of any animal I've ever encountered. It has a very painful sting, and you should also go onto YouTube and find videos of people getting stung by these things, because those are entertaining too. But this painful sting, they fly like grid patterns, like a drone, right above the ground in search for tarantulas. And when they find one, they attack it, they sting it, and their sting paralyzes the tarantula. They then grab the tarantula and drag it back to its burrow. And, these are big spiders, so it tells you how strong and how big these wasps are. And then it lays an egg on the tarantula, which is still alive. It's paralyzed, but still alive. It's in a vegetative state. And the egg hatches, becomes a larva. The larva parasitically feeds on the tarantula, making sure it doesn't eat any of its vital organs, like the book lungs and the things that spiders have. And it feeds on it until it grows and then pupates and becomes an adult and then flies away. It is fearsome. It's scary. It's got a great sting, and it kills tarantulas, which I think a lot of people, have a lot of respect for a bug that does that. Anyway, this group of us that have been talking about spiders for a couple of years, we're just fascinated by this thing, and we're at the point now where we want to find a minor league baseball team to name their team the Tarantula Hawks and make this logo a minor league baseball team jersey, because they're just extremely cool. Am I overstating that position, guys?
If anything, I feel like you haven't gone far enough. You haven't talked about their ability to intoxicate themselves.
Well, that's the other thing about this certain, Arachnid Sportsman Society group, is that we have themes, and we have an annual meeting at a bar, and so that kind of tells you about the temperament of the group. But yeah, so these adult wasps don't eat anything except fruit and flowers. They feed on flowers. They're probably pollinators. I'm sure Pheasants Forever is working hard to protect their habitat. But when you're in the desert Southwest and you have fruit that becomes fermented in the heat, it forms alcohol, and these wasps are known to feed on the fermented fruit, get drunk, and not be able to fly, which I think is a very responsible thing for a wasp. That if you consume too much alcohol, don't fly home. I mean, we've got a number of pilots that have been in the news in recent years that didn't learn that lesson, and it's just a responsible thing to do.
Do you feel like maybe there's a threshold after maybe 2 alcoholic flowers, then they've got enough courage to take on the tarantula, but after 4, they just go to sleep?
I think after 2, but not past 12, is probably when the hilltopping happens, isn't it? Bronson, what's hilltopping?
Right, well, hilltopping is the behavior where the males, when they're amorous, find vegetation that stands above everything else, and they get up there and they display, trying to attract females, and it's called hilltopping. I think if I recall that Andrew wasn't one of your school mascots the Hilltoppers?
I wish. My school mascots make the Gophers look downright ferocious. My high school mascot, we were the Midgets.
Bummer.
Yeah,
not for real.
Putnam County Midgets, Unionville, Missouri, and I think that there was actually a class action lawsuit from those little people, because that changed our iconography, because our mascot was actually a squat. It's in the middle of the gym at the high school. This kind of squat, thyroid afflicted small person. Also, maybe complexion was a little dark, holding up 2 fists like, I'm gonna get you this time, Busta.
So it was like the Notre Dame leprechaun, except made even less racially sensitive.
That's right. So I graduated from the midgets to Grinnell College in Iowa. We were the pioneers. Also, that just strikes fear in the heart of opponents. Like, hey, we're going to settle you.
But we're going to stick with it. We're going to give it a great effort. we are going to be very hardy. Hey, speaking of graduates, I heard the other day that Minnesota grads were no longer allowed to keep their diplomas on their dashboards. Did you hear about that? They were using them to park in handicap spaces. Oh, jeez. No? But
all right. So, for the listeners that are trying to understand why we keep telling these bad jokes, it's a commitment to maintaining a tradition that our fathers gave to us of telling bad dad jokes. So we call these dad jokes. So just understand that we know. You don't have to laugh. You can just shake your head. That's really what we want to do too. So what was your high school mascot, Eric?
It was the Laverne Cardinal in Laverne, Minnesota.
Were there any Cardinals in Laverne?
I don't remember that being the case, but we do have two in our backyard now. Big deal to my little people when they see those.
Bronson, what was your mascot?
So I went to Elk River High School in Minnesota, and we were the Elks. We were elk with an S at the end of it.
Redundant high school is redundant.
Well, we had a 6x6 full body mount elk under glass in our cafeteria, and you knew where your position was in the hierarchy of the school by how close you sat to it during lunch. So if you were a senior in the in crowd, your table was right next to the elk in the cafeteria. The irony of this being that Elk River has not had elk in it for 150 years. They once were native to that part of Minnesota, but we don't have them anymore. But I guess it's still there. I haven't been back there for 30 years, but 20 years. They still have it, I am told.
Did you have like a war cry or like a fight song that involved bugling?
No. Honestly, even back then, I probably didn't know what a bugle was. I mean, I didn't know much about elk, but that would have been cool. There was one time when my dad came home from Wyoming and he had cow elk with him. He was out there hunting elk. He didn't just happen to find it, but brought it home. And he had just gotten home after driving, overnight and got there, and we were leaving for hockey practice, and I played for the Elk River Elks. And so we all took our hockey sticks and we rubbed our sticks with elk blood before we went to the game. I don't know if we won or not, but we thought that probably had some sort of significance. It probably was just a health violation. I don't know.
Come on, I'm going to say a dad joke unless somebody tells me what they're going to do this week. I know we know what Bronson's going to do this weekend, but Dinger, you got plans?
Yeah, an interesting weekend in my life. Well, for me, probably not for our listeners, but many of you have kids, I'm sure, so you'll understand. But my family plan probably differs from a lot of y'all's family plans substantially in that Sunday, my oldest daughter moves onto campus at the University of Nebraska, which is a real college, and they do issue degrees. And, yes, they have sports teams. I'm trying to preempt anything Bronson was going to ask. So she'll be a freshman at the university, and my littlest, Raleigh, my son, is going to start kindergarten Monday. So we have a weekend we're going to shoot bows tomorrow. The two little ones got their first bow. They got a little bear bow that's actually a pretty cool little bow. So we're going to shoot bows Saturday and then move Maddie in Sunday and take the two little ones to elementary school on Monday. So it's going to be a lot of crying, I would guess, in the Dinger household in the next few days. How about you? What are you up to?
Well, I'm going to I got a new rifle mounted up. I'm going to shoot in 105 degrees. That's going to be its own brand of specialness. But then I've got to do a lot of honeydews. I'm fixing a back storm door. That'll be all right. But I'm excited because hunting season is actually here. I'm going to California next week to hunt black-tailed deer in the vineyards of the Central Coast. I feel a little funny about it just because the entire state is on fire. And I'm going to go and hopefully recreate. I do feel a little guilty. I hope there are no fires near me. If there are, I hope I do the right thing and help put them out. But yeah, so I'm going to get ready for hunting season. It seems it's a little too early.
So
but
is this an archery season?
No, it's a rifle season in mid-August.
Okay.
California's got some pretty funny season structures. I think they actually start hunting deer the last day or two of July in some of the units. And it's
weird.
It's one where you're going to have to be careful with the meat. I mean, especially in a backcountry unit, you better know what you're going to do in advance.
Wow.
So you're in wine country. So is this like Sonoma County? I mean,
it's actually
too far in, isn't it?
Yeah, Napa's too far north. This is Paso Robles and kind of Steinbeck country. So
okay.
I anticipate there's going to be a lot of Zinfandel consumed.
So if you shoot a blacktail this year and you drink it, and you eat it, not drink it, do you try to pair it with the wine from the area that you're at? Or do you look at the package of meat and say, 2018, that was a really good year?
Oh, man. No, I think you have to pair it with kind of the vintage from the place. And I know less now than I'll know next week, I hope. But apparently a lot of the vineyards there erect high fences to keep the deer out because deer, not unlike tarantula hawks, love a good fermented grape. But there's a series of vineyards that figure that deer belong on the landscape just as much as vineyards do, so they don't high fence them. But they ask hunters to come and manage the deer in the vineyard. So that's kind of what we're doing. It's a little bit of a depredation hunt, but I sure don't mind. It's just going to continue my education as a deer hunter, I guess. I hope.
Well, and, people probably don't know this, but Andrew is a member of the board of directors for the Mule Deer Foundation, which their mission is protecting habitat for mule deer and blacktail deer. And blacktails get forgotten a lot, in large part because they exist in a just narrow band of the country along the Pacific coast. And a big chunk of that's in California, where the rest of the country wants to pretend that hunting doesn't exist because they think that it doesn't. But I mean, California's got some really good hunting in it. Its politics are hard, but beautiful places, and so I'm intrigued by the idea of going to California and hunting blacktails in August. That's pretty cool.
One thing I'm really curious about is, that I associate blacktails with some pretty dense kind of hemlock forest country. This is pretty open. As I look at some of the pictures of the deer, they really look like mule deer to me. But the species dividing point is Interstate 5, and so that's a pretty porous boundary if you're a deer. So my guess is there's some blacktail mule deer sort of inner activity here. But I'm really curious. I love hunting mule deer in any habitat. I'm really intrigued to see how we're going to do it in kind of vineyard country. And whether these things come out of the woodlands and come down into the fields, I have no idea.
Man. So are you doing this with a TV show at all or anything?
Nope, it's a Mossberg hunt. One of the great things about being an outdoor writer, which is the profession both of my choice and because it's just sort of what I gravitated to, is you get these remarkable invitations to kind of have come along adventures. So I'm going to go along and have an adventure with Mossberg and figure out what this is all about. But you're right, California is a strange place. So, for instance, it's banned lead ammunition. So that's the first hurdle. The second one is just getting the deer tag took an awful lot of work. They've kind of made it difficult in every way to go hunt, but doggone it, I've got everything I need, and I intend to go experience it.
I hunted ducks in California last year, and a lot of people don't realize this, but California is a big duck producing state. There's pintails and mallards that nest in California and grow up there. It's a huge duck hunting state. Unfortunately, the best duck hunting is all locked up by multi-million-dollar duck leases, but the resources in that state that are producing ducks is just it's amazing. It's one of the best duck hunts I've ever been on. The highlight for me was, I got a full-colored spoony drake that's a taxidermist now, which people laughed at me when they said I told them I was there to get a spoony, but I was. And then I also got a cinnamon teal, and that, which, we don't get in the places that I hunt in the central and Mississippi flyways. But the teal was banded, which was fascinating, but it had hatched and grown up in California. California is a state that's got resources. It's unfortunate that politics are what it is, and and the whole lead ban. I testified before the California State Legislature on that topic, and it's a different world, that's for sure. But there's almost 1 million hunters in that state, which is a fraction of the population, but there's a lot of gun owners in that state too that are just like me, and being from Minnesota, and they could be anywhere else. It's just they happen to live in a place that's tough to do what they do.
I was writing a story on desert bighorn sheep ecology, and the department, the California Fish and Game Department, has not inventoried a lot of the island mountain ranges in the southern part of the state. They probably have more sheep than they even know about, but because they can't put a number on it, they can't issue tags for it. So one of the things we were working on was really trying to get more funding to the department so that they could inventory some of these really uncounted sheep herds. And as you know, desert sheep is kind of the pinnacle of the sheep society. A lot of people go to Baja, Mexico, and spend a lot of money trying to get a desert sheep. When, if really the department was funded adequately, there could be an awful lot more desert sheep hunting in the Golden State.
Which play that forward, Andrew. For our listeners that are sort of new to hunting, why would having the money to count sheep so you can kill them make any sense?
Well, it's not necessarily counting them to kill them. Being able to hunt them is just a byproduct of having the population, a sustainable population. But one of the interesting things there is, and it's a dynamic of wildlife management anywhere, if you don't know what you have, it's hard to manage them appropriately, and that whether or not there's a hunting season on them or just trying to figure out the kind of habitats that they use. So in terms of being kind of the big picture, there's a great public value in just managing the land for those, because if you're managing them right for sheep, you're also going to manage them right for all the associated species, including an awful lot of kind of desert ecology that's kind of ephemeral. One of the interesting things in that country is it's real monsoonal, and so they'll have wildflowers and vegetation that shows up in these little microclimates that you can backfill and figure out that's where a monsoonal storm dwelled for a little bit, dropped another half inch of rain that the neighboring mountain range didn't get. So there's an awful lot of things besides the sheep that depend on that really arid, pretty tough landscape. But knowing if the sheep thrive is going to give you a pretty good indication that there's an awful lot of other things that's thriving too.
So a big mystery to me coming into the outdoor industry, I studied human biology. I wasn't an animal scientist or a biologist of any sort. But I always struggled with the concept that you just said, because why would something like that require human intervention? So it's managing itself today. In my head, this is how I was thinking when I would first hear things like what you just said. It's managing itself just fine without us. Why does it matter if we know how many of X, Y, and Z are there? And it was a revelation to me. Actually, some folks from the Wildlife Management Institute explained what is probably a really obvious thing to you guys, but it's not something I knew, that humans have largely stopped the natural processes that would help an ecosystem like that maintain its natural sensibilities. And so one of the things I always wondered was, like, why do we need forest managers to manage sweeping wilderness? And it's because nature managed it for years, but now we douse out wildfires and we, select for certain species in certain areas, and we build cities and houses and places we protect and things that are intrusions into the ecosystem. And in many ways, we prevent the ecosystem from being its natural self. And thus we need to manage it and aid it in its processes. And you guys can both explain that way better than I can, but that fascinated me and was a completely new open book of sort of thought when I first heard that. Would you guys mind talking about that for a second?
Well, I can tackle a little bit of that and, tie it to some systems that others might be a little more familiar with. But, first off, when we look at landscape alterations, I mean, we have altered landscapes quite a bit. We've got a lot of human-related systems going on. We've got grazing, we've got oil things. But one of the biggest habitat factors that's affecting wildlife and ecosystems right now is the fact that we have suppressed fire for a long time. And at the same time that we've, in recent history, that we've been suppressing fire, so Smokey Bear has been bad for wildlife overall, in my opinion, because all of America, for the most part, grew up with before there were European settlement, there were periodic fires that burned down small parts of forests and reduced fuel loads, but there weren't lots of major catastrophic fires because the fuel loads never had a chance to build up because fire was natural. It happened all the time. And so those things happened, and so you had a mix of habitats. You had young forests that grew up after a small fire, and young forests for most of especially the game species we're interested in, but lots of non-game species, they need young forests because young forests have lots of plants that can be, eaten near the ground. When you get big, old-growth forests, they create the canopy, and when that canopy exists, you don't get a lot of plants growing near the ground. So animals like a deer that can only reach what's between ground level and 6 feet up, there's not a lot for them to eat. Well, that's true for lots of species as well. There are a few species that need old-growth forest, but they're not, there's few that are normal that. When you look at the desert Southwest, there's lots of issues going on. Free-flowing rivers don't exist. We're drawing water from the rivers. People have water rights. So some of the water sources, by the time they get to the ocean, most of the fresh water has been withdrawn for use for human uses, whether it's for cities or for irrigating crops. Some of our most fertile croplands are in Southern California, in that part of Arizona down there. Yuma, Arizona grows most of the lettuce in the country, which people became aware of recently because of the E. coli scares that happened with some tainted lettuce that came from there. But the reason they're able to do that is they're diverting water from rivers that used to flow down up out of the mountains where snow melt and rain and run up and got to the ocean, and that was the source of water for most things. And so we've diverted those things. And so as the landscapes have changed to accommodate humans, we have to manage those landscapes so that they can function still in both a ecologically sustainable way, but also so that we're being humane. Because an unregulated prey population is going to grow rapidly, get big, and if they're not controlled, disease and starvation happens, and then you have population crashes. Those are natural, but those, I think they're counter to most human sensibilities, that it's one, wasteful that there's a resource that's not being utilized, that animals are starving to death or dying of disease, but more importantly, those animals are suffering in ways that are unnecessary, that they're starving and dying of diseases in ways where if they're harvested, frankly, by humans through hunting, generally that death is a lot more humane, quick, fast, and that resource then goes on and provides some utility to humans rather than just going to waste. And some people might not value that utility to human part, but it's real. So we've got those issues, but then we've got other human interactions that are just negatively affecting wildlife populations. And when we look at sheep's biggest problem, the biggest threat to wild sheep in the United States is exposure to domestic sheep. And the outdoor industry, I think, has a pretty big role to play in that, because almost all of us have converted to wearing a lot of wool clothing. And I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that our wool is coming from places that are sustainable and safe for wild sheep. Because if you've got a domestic flock of sheep that are interacting with a herd of wild sheep, they're likely to be carrying a bacteria that causes disease, it causes pneumonia, and it causes decimation in wild sheep populations. So we've got all these different interactions. So I think it's incumbent on us, as the people that have completely changed every ecosystem in the world, to manage those ecosystems to maintain a place for all of these wild things to continue to be. And so ends the lesson. God, that was preachy. Sorry, guys.
I was looking for that. Thanks. You want to bring us home, Mr. McKean?
I do, because I think what Bronson's lecture lesson, hell yes-isms, kind of bring to bear on me anyway, is that human intervention part, the human management. And yeah, all you have to do is look at, you can even tie it back to the gophers. Gophers are a prey species that is in very cyclic, at least where we are. We'll have these big spikes where there's gophers everywhere, and then disease will come through, or there'll be something that suppresses the population. And at least where we are, we can go for years without seeing very many. That's a species that really is beneath a lot of the human management. As Bronson mentioned, they're not a protected species, at least in very many places that I know. To bring this back to bear, that human element of getting out and being an active part of that management we don't really think about that as hunters very often. We do it because we're passionate about it. It's something that we were brought up doing. But I think the way to end this one, at least, is to be more intentional about thinking about our role in being that, thumb on the scales to make sure that these human manipulated species that already have a lot of human sort of intervention in their natural history or unnatural history also need humans to help manage them. So that's Bronson was way more elegant about that, but participate in that management and don't get tick bitten that prevents you from enjoying the ultimate part of management, and that's eating the critters. And I'm just going to stop talking now. You bring us home, Dinger. You're pretty good at this.
All right. We need one takeaway from today's podcast. My takeaway, I'll start with this. Everybody around you that you interact with is just an invite away from being a hunter. And we can make hunting hard and complicated. We can talk ecosystems and we can talk ethics and all of the above, but ultimately that conversation is best had when you're out together. You will never value something, you will never cherish something that you don't experience. So my takeaway this week is bring somebody. How about you, Bronson? What should somebody do this week?
Well, it's August. We're not too far away from dove season. We're not too far away from all of the other seasons. I'm a shotgunner first and foremost, and so what I'll be doing this Friday is I'll be with Pheasants Forever at a Sporting Clays event. But I think everyone should get out there, get the shotgun out, burn up some shells, practice your wing shooting, be ready for the season. And just remember that every time you squeeze the trigger, that shotgun shell that you bought and that shotgun that you're holding, you paid an 11% tax called the Pittman-Robertson tax. Every time you pull the trigger, you're contributing to conservation. You're helping pay for the scientific and wildlife managers that are out there protecting wild sheep and protecting gophers and doing all of the work. So participate in it, contribute to conservation, and go burn up some shells.
There we have it. Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of On Gravel. Stay tuned for episode 3.